A single second can feel like an infinity when it carries the weight of a life-changing choice and deep emotion. We capture those eternal moments and turn them into cinematic art for your viewing pleasure. Hit subscribe now and explore the infinite nature of the human story with us. My son-in-law straightened his tie and grinned at me from across the conference table like a man who had already spent the money. He leaned toward my daughter and said something into her ear. She covered her mouth, laughed, and then looked directly at me with an expression I had not seen on her face since she was 12 years old, and caught me going through her diary. Contempt. Pure, clean contempt. "Dad," my daughter said, loud enough for the attorney and his paralegal to both hear, "You understand that Mom updated the will 2 years ago, right? After the separation?" She tilted her head. "This is just a formality for you. You might want to grab a coffee from the lobby. This could take a while." My son-in-law patted the armrest of his chair as if he were petting a dog he liked. "We don't want it to be awkward, Walter. Family dynamics being what they are." He smiled again. He always smiled when he said things designed to wound. I folded my hands on the table. My knuckles were rough. I had spent 34 years as a structural engineer, most of it on job sites in the Texas heat, and my hands showed it. My daughter's hands were soft. Her husband had never built anything in his life. "I'll stay," I said. "My daughter's name is Renee. She is 41 years old, and she married a man named Craig, who sells commercial real estate and considers himself an authority on everything. When my wife Dorothy and I separated 3 years ago, not divorced, separated, Craig decided that separation meant I was out of the family picture entirely. He stopped inviting me to Thanksgiving. He told the grandchildren, 2 boys under the age of 10, that Grandpa Walter was going through something. He began referring to Dorothy's assets as though they were already his, counting square footage and appraised values out loud at dinner, smiling at the numbers the way some men smile at their own reflections. Dorothy died 7 weeks ago. A brain aneurysm. She was at the grocery store buying the marinated artichoke hearts she knew I loved and that she pretended to hate. The paramedics found her loyalty card in her purse. They used it to identify her next of kin. Renee called me 20 minutes after she got the call. The first thing she said was, "Where were you?" As if I had caused it. As if 38 years of marriage and 3 years of separation had not left me still knowing every sound she made in her sleep. I drove 6 hours from my apartment in Beaumont to Houston to identify her body. Craig waited in the car. The attorney's name was Gerald Whitmore. He was a careful man in his 60s with a silver pen he clicked exactly once before he spoke. He had been Dorothy's attorney for 19 years. He knew where everything was buried because Dorothy had been meticulous about her estate, the way she was meticulous about everything, including the separation agreement that Craig had clearly explained to Renee meant Dorothy was finally free of me. Gerald clicked his pen. "The estate of Dorothy Ann Grimes," he began, "consists of the primary residence at 14 Caldwell Terrace, valued at approximately $3.1 million. The commercial property on Westheimer Boulevard, valued at $4.8 million. The investment portfolio, currently liquidated to approximately $9.2 million in managed funds. And the controlling interest in Grimes Development LLC, estimated at $5.4 million based on current contracts." Craig exhaled. He had done this math before. I could tell by the way he didn't react, the practiced stillness of a man reciting a number he had memorized. $22.5 million. That was Dorothy's life's work. She had built a real estate development company from a single duplex we bought together in 1987 with money I had saved from 3 years on an offshore drilling project. She had the vision, I had the savings. We had shaken on it over bad coffee in a kitchen that smelled like the previous tenant's cats. Gerald turned a page. He cleared his throat once. "To my daughter, Renee Ann Hartwell, I leave the sum of $200,000 to be distributed upon the settlement of the estate." Renee nodded. She was expecting more. I could tell, but she was patient. She assumed the LLC was coming. "To my son-in-law, Craig Hartwell, I leave nothing." Craig's smile did not move. It froze. The muscles in his face held the expression in place while the rest of him processed what had just been said. "The primary residence, the commercial property, the investment portfolio, and the controlling interest in Grimes Development LLC, Gerald continued, are to be placed in their entirety into the Dorothy Ann Grimes Irrevocable Trust. A trust, Renee said. Okay. So I'm the beneficiary of the trust? You are a beneficiary, Gerald said. A discretionary beneficiary. The trust's distributions are at the sole discretion of the trustee. And who, Craig said, his voice arriving from somewhere very far away and very cold, is the trustee? Gerald Whitmore looked at me. I had not moved. I had not changed my expression. I had not touched the glass of water in front of me. I was thinking about Dorothy in the grocery store, about artichoke hearts, about the morning in 1987 when we shook hands over coffee that tasted like machine oil. And I was thinking about how she always knew exactly what she was doing. The sole trustee, Gerald said, with full and final authority over all assets of the trust, is Walter James Grimes. Renee turned to look at me the way you turn to look at something you heard move in a room you thought was empty. Craig stood up. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood there with his hands flat on the conference table and his jaw working silently. Then he pointed at me. Not at Gerald. At me. She was sick, Craig said. At the end, she wasn't thinking clearly. Everybody knows that. The aneurysm didn't come out of nowhere. She had been having symptoms for months. Her judgment was compromised. We will contest this. You are welcome to, Gerald said pleasantly. Though I should mention that Mrs. Grimes executed this trust 14 months ago during an independent competency evaluation and signed it in the presence of 2 attorneys, a notary, and a physician who assessed her as fully cognitively sound. She was quite specific about what she wanted. Craig looked at me. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. Dad. Renee's voice had changed. All the lightness was gone from it. What was left was the voice she used when she was genuinely frightened. Dad, what did you do? I didn't do anything, I said. I just showed up. I drove back to Beaumont that night. I did not stop for dinner. I had a thermos of coffee and a country station on the radio and 400 miles of highway to think in. My phone rang 47 times between Houston and the Beaumont city limits. I counted. I did not answer once. I was not being cruel. I was being an engineer. An engineer does not react to the first stress report. An engineer reads the whole structural analysis, identifies the load-bearing problem, and then, only then, decides what needs to be reinforced and what needs to come down. Craig was going to make a move. I knew that, the same way I knew, watching a poured foundation, where the cracks were going to form. He was a man who needed to be in control of things. And I had just taken control of the only thing he had ever cared about. He would not sit quietly. He would probe the structure. He would look for the weak point. I had to make sure there was none. The call I had been waiting for came 4 days later. It was not from Craig. It was from a number I didn't recognize. A Houston area code. I answered. The voice was professional and warm in the way that real estate attorneys are professional and warm when they are calling someone they intend to outmaneuver. Mr. Grimes? My name is Dennis Falk. I'm representing your daughter in a matter regarding the Dorothy Grimes estate. I was hoping we might have a conversation. About what? I said. About an arrangement, Falk said. A practical one. We believe there may be grounds to challenge the trust on the basis of undue influence. However, that process is time-consuming and expensive for everyone. We'd like to propose a settlement. You transfer administrative control of the LLC to the Hartwell family. In exchange, the investment portfolio, roughly $9 million, comes to you free and clear. You walk away comfortable, Mr. Grimes. Everyone does. I sat with that for a moment. Outside my apartment window, a cardinal was sitting on the fence post. Dorothy loved cardinals. She said they were messengers. I had always been too practical to believe in things like that. But I watched the bird for a moment before I answered. I'll need to consult with my attorney, I said. Of course, Falk said. Take your time. I'll be in touch, I said, and hung up.
I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had an office in downtown Beaumont and a reputation for being extremely difficult to rattle. I had known Patricia for 11 years. She had handled my mother's estate and the legal fallout from a construction contract dispute in 2018. And she was the person Dorothy had called when she decided to set up the trust. They offered you $9 million to walk away from 22, Patricia said. Yes. What do you want to do? I want you to send a letter declining the offer, I said. And I want you to start the clock on the trustee's 6-month estate review. Full audit of the LLC accounts going back 3 years. Silence on the line. Then Patricia said, Walter, what did you find? I haven't found anything yet, I said. But Craig has been on the LLC's board of advisors for 2 years. Dorothy added him to look legitimate with investors. He's not a signatory, but he has access to internal records. I want to know what he's been looking at. 3 days after I sent the decline through Patricia, Renee came to Beaumont. She didn't call first. She knocked on my apartment door on a Wednesday morning, and when I opened it, she was standing in the hallway in a coat I had bought her for Christmas 4 years ago, before things went wrong between us. She looked like she hadn't slept. I let her in. I made coffee. I sat across from her at the small kitchen table and I waited. Craig says you're doing this to punish me, she said finally, for taking his side during the separation. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm the trustee. Your mother left me instructions. I'm following them. Why did she leave it to you? Renee said. You were separated. You hadn't lived together in 3 years. We talked every week, I said. On Sundays. You didn't know that. She looked at her coffee cup. Craig says she was manipulated. He says you must have found out she was sick, and you went to her and… Craig says a lot of things, I said. She flinched. Not because I had raised my voice. I hadn't. Because she knew it was true. He's my husband, she said. He is. I agreed. And I'm your father. Those two things are not in conflict unless someone is making them conflict. She left 2 hours later without resolving anything. I watched her car pull out of the parking lot, and I felt the particular sadness of a man who understands a problem clearly and cannot fix it with his hands. The lawsuit arrived the following week. Craig and his attorney were claiming undue influence and diminished capacity. They had a signed affidavit from a physician named Dr. Halverson who claimed he had treated Dorothy for cognitive symptoms 18 months before her death and had noted early indicators of impaired judgment. They had attached a list of decisions Dorothy had allegedly made in that period that demonstrated erratic behavior, including the establishment of the irrevocable trust. Patricia called me the morning the filing landed. This doctor, I said. Do we know him? He's a geriatric specialist with a private practice in the Woodlands, Patricia said. His name has come up before in estate disputes. He is not well regarded by the judiciary. How much does an affidavit from him cost? I asked. Based on comparable cases, Patricia said. Somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000. Find out who paid him, I said. And Patricia, pull Craig's personal financial records. Everything that's available publicly. Tax liens, judgments, credit actions. She found the lien in 48 hours. The IRS had filed a tax lien against Craig Hartwell 18 months ago for unpaid income tax from his commercial brokerage commissions. The amount was $340,000. I sat with that number for a long time. $340,000 is not a catastrophic debt for a man with access to a $22 million estate. But it is a catastrophic debt for a man who suddenly no longer has access to that estate. It was the pressure point. It was the reason for the $9 million settlement offer. He needed cash, and he needed it before the IRS came knocking harder. The second attack came from a direction I hadn't fully anticipated. Renee went on social media. She posted a photograph of herself with the 2 boys, my grandsons, at what looked like a park. The caption read something about how hard it was to grieve when family conflict made it impossible to properly honor someone's memory. The comments were sympathetic. People who had never met Dorothy were expressing condolences and calling me, without naming me, a bitter old man who was weaponizing grief. I was not on social media. I had never been. I did not intend to start, but I had a neighbor named Frank who was 70 years old and extremely online, and who called me to report the situation as if it were a weather emergency. There's about 600 comments, Walter, Frank said. Some of them are pretty rough. Okay, I said. You're not upset? The courthouse doesn't have a comment section, I said. Patricia filed a response to the lawsuit requesting an expedited hearing and submitted Dorothy's competency evaluation along with the full execution record of the trust, including the physician's assessment and the independent attorney witness statement. She also submitted, quietly and without fanfare, 3 years of Dorothy's personal correspondence that Dorothy had specifically provided for this purpose. Dorothy had anticipated this. She had given Patricia a sealed file with the instruction to open it only if the trust was legally challenged. Inside were printed emails, dated and logged, in which Craig had discussed with a business associate his plans for the LLC in terms that made clear he considered it already his, nearly 2 years before Dorothy's death. In one email, he described Dorothy as the last obstacle. He had meant it in a business context, but read in a courtroom, next to a legal challenge claiming the trust was the product of undue influence, it read as something else entirely. The judge reviewed the documents in a closed hearing and denied the motion to contest the trust within 10 days of filing. Craig's attorney did not appeal. I thought it was over. I was wrong in the way that experienced engineers are sometimes wrong. Not about the structure, but about the timeline. Craig's second move was quieter and more dangerous than the lawsuit. He went to the LLC's general manager, a man named Terry who had worked for Dorothy for 12 years, and he told Terry that the trust dispute was ongoing and the company's future was uncertain. He told Terry that he, Craig, had been in preliminary discussions with a buyer, a private equity group out of Atlanta, who was interested in acquiring Grimes Development's active contracts, and that if the company was going to be absorbed anyway, it might be wise for key staff to start making alternative arrangements. Terry called me. He called me because Dorothy had told him to call me if Craig ever started talking to him about buyers. She had said it very specifically, according to Terry, in the same calm tone she used for all her instructions. She told me about 14 months ago, Terry said. She said, if Mr. Hartwell ever approaches you about selling the company or preparing for transition, call Walter first. She gave me your number. I flew to Houston the next morning. First flight. I had not been on an airplane in 4 years. I forgot how small the seats were. I walked into the Grimes Development offices at 9 in the morning with Patricia and 2 members of the board, Dorothy's long-term board members, not Craig's advisory position. I called an emergency board meeting and I presented, as trustee, a resolution. The resolution confirmed the company's full operational continuity under trust management, froze any asset disposition discussions for 12 months, pending trust settlement, and formally removed Craig Hartwell's advisory access to company records effective immediately. Craig arrived at the office at 10:30. He walked in wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. He had a man with him I didn't recognize who turned out to be an attorney. When he saw me sitting at the head of the conference table, he stopped walking. You don't have authority to call a board meeting, Craig said. The trustee has authority over all trust assets, Patricia said pleasantly. The controlling interest in Grimes Development is a trust asset. Walter called this meeting as trustee. Craig looked at me. He had the expression of a man who had been certain of the footing and just felt it shift. Dorothy wouldn't have wanted this, he said. It was a different argument than the legal one. He was trying something softer. You're disrupting everything she built. You're creating chaos in a company that her employees depend on. I'm protecting the company, I said. From a private equity sale that no one on this board approved or was informed about. The room was quiet. Terry, sitting at the far end of the table, looked at his hands. Craig turned to his attorney. The attorney leaned in and said something quietly. Craig's jaw tightened. He looked back at me. You'll regret this, Walter. You said that about the lawsuit, I replied. And here I am. He left. The consequences of that meeting arrived in stages. First, Craig moved out of the house on Caldwell Terrace. He did it suddenly and without telling Renee first, which told me he had already arranged alternate housing. which told me the move had been planned. He was separating his exposure from Renee's, legally and practically. He was preparing for a fight that would require him to be a free agent. Then he filed for divorce. Renee called me the night she got the papers. She cried for a long time without saying anything useful, and I sat on the other end of the phone in my apartment in Beaumont and let her cry because that was the right thing to do, and there was nothing else to do. When she stopped, I said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart." "Were you?" she asked. "Were you sorry?" "Because you knew what he was. You knew, and I chose him anyway, and you never said a word." I said some words. I said, "You didn't want to hear them." "No," she admitted. "I didn't." We sat with that for a while. "Mom knew too," Renee said finally. "Didn't she?" "It wasn't really a question." "Your mother," I said carefully, "knew a great many things that she kept to herself until the moment was right." The IRS lien went to judgment the following month. The federal government placed a levy on Craig's brokerage accounts. Combined with the legal fees from the failed trust contest, the separation from Renee's finances, and the collapse of whatever arrangement he had imagined with the private equity group, Craig's financial position deteriorated rapidly and visibly. He sold his car. He moved into an apartment in a part of Houston that was not where he had previously represented himself as being from. I did not gloat. I want to be honest about that. There was a version of me that wanted to gloat. I am human. And he had called me a bitter old man on the internet and told my daughter I was punishing her and used a paid physician to call Dorothy's mind into question. The desire to gloat was present. But Dorothy had not set up the trust so I could gloat. She had set it up so I could build something. And I had not yet done that part. I found the letter in Dorothy's personal files, the ones Gerald Whitmore had preserved in sealed storage. It was addressed to me in her handwriting, which was compact and slanted and absolutely certain of itself, the way she had been about everything. "Walter," it began, "if you are reading this, you made it through the hard part. I am proud of you. I know how much you hate this kind of thing." She was right. I had hated every minute of the past 9 months. I had not slept well. I had eaten poorly. I had become the kind of person who takes notes in margins and calls attorneys before breakfast, and I had never wanted to be that person. "I know you want to give Renee everything," she wrote. "Don't. Not yet. She needs to find out what she's made of without a safety net, the same way we did in 1987. If you hand her the company, she will hand it to the next man who impresses her. Let her come to it when she's ready. What I want you to build," the letter continued, "is the thing I never got around to. In the LLC's project files, under the folder labeled Westheimer Phase 2, there is a set of architectural plans I commissioned 2 years ago. Nobody knows about them except me and the architect. They were meant for the commercial property. I was going to wait until I felt better. I kept waiting. I found the folder. The plans were for a workforce housing development. 48 units. Affordable rent, tiered by income. Community kitchen. Child care on the ground floor. Dorothy had annotated the margins in her compact handwriting. Notes about the kind of tenants she had in mind. Young families. Seniors on fixed incomes. People who worked service jobs in the Galleria area and commuted 90 minutes each way because they couldn't afford to live near their work. She had also written, in the bottom corner of the first page, in letters slightly larger than the rest, "This is what the money is for." I called Terry. "I need to know which contractors we have active relationships with," I said. "And I need you to pull the Westheimer Phase 2 files." Terry was quiet for a moment. "Dorothy's project?" "Dorothy's project," I said. "It took 14 months to break ground. There were permits and zoning appeals and one neighborhood association that objected, and then, after I attended 2 of their meetings and explained the project in terms of traffic impact and tax base, declined to continue objecting. Patricia negotiated the financing structure. The LLC provided the equity, the trust provided the guarantee, and a community development lender provided a favorable loan. I was on the site every week. Not because I had to be. Because I was an engineer, and the site was where I was most comfortable, among the concrete forms and the rebar and the men who built things with their hands. On the day the framing was complete, I stood at the edge of the lot and looked at the skeleton of the building rising against the Houston sky, and I thought about Dorothy in the grocery store and the artichoke hearts and the card in her purse, and I thought about a kitchen in 1987 that smelled like the previous tenant's cats. And I thought that a building is just a promise you make to the ground, that something will stand here, that it will hold. Renee found her way back to me slowly, the way people find their way back to things they should not have left. She came to Beaumont for Thanksgiving, and then for Christmas. She brought the boys. My grandsons were 10 and 8 by then, and they didn't fully understand what had happened, except that their grandfather was in charge of something big, and their father was not in the picture anymore. They asked me once why I lived in an apartment if I was in charge of so much money. I told them that the money belonged to the building, not to me. The younger one thought about that for a while and then said, "Like how the school belongs to everybody but the principal is in charge." "Exactly like that," I said. Renee started working at the LLC 8 months after the divorce was finalized. She started in the project management office, not at the top. I was specific about that. She was not made a director. She was not given a title that outran her experience. She worked beside Terry, and she learned the business from the ground floor, which is the only way to learn anything that is worth knowing. She was good at it. She had Dorothy's precision and her mother's instinct for which projects were worth the risk. I watched her in meetings, and I saw Dorothy in the way she listened before she spoke, in the way she held a room without trying to. On the day the Westheimer building had its first tenants, a ceremony that involved too many speeches and a ribbon that was the wrong shade of blue, I stood at the back of the crowd and watched the families move through the courtyard. There were children running on the grass. There was a woman with 2 bags of groceries and a toddler on her hip stopping to look up at the building with an expression that was not happiness exactly, but something quieter and more durable than happiness. Relief, maybe. The feeling of a load that has been carried too long finally being set down. Renee found me at the back of the crowd. She stood next to me without saying anything for a while. "Mom would have loved this," she said finally. "Yes," I said. "She planned it for a long time." "She planned everything for a long time," I said. "She just didn't always tell people." Renee looked at me. She had her mother's eyes. She always had. "She told you. She told me what she needed me to know," I said. When the time was right, Renee was quiet for a moment. Down in the courtyard, a boy about the age of my younger grandson was kicking a soccer ball against a wall. The sound of it echoed across the concrete, rhythmic and persistent. "Craig called me last week," she said. "What did he want?" "He wanted to know if the company was doing well. He was fishing. He said he felt like he deserved something given all the years he was part of the family." I watched the boy with the soccer ball. "What did you tell him?" Renee smiled. It was a small smile. It was a smile I recognized because I had seen it once before, in a kitchen in 1987, when a young woman looked at a floor plan of a rundown duplex and saw, without any evidence to support the vision, exactly what it could become. "I told him to contact the trustee," she said. I put my arm around my daughter's shoulders. She leaned into me a little. We stood there at the back of the crowd and watched the families in the courtyard. And I thought that this was what Dorothy had meant when she wrote "The money is for this." Not the building, not the ribbon or the speeches. This, the people in the courtyard, the boy with the ball, my daughter next to me. I have been an engineer for 34 years. I have built things that still stand. I have built things that have held weight I never fully anticipated. I have calculated load-bearing capacities and stress tolerances and the tensile strength of steel under conditions no one wanted to think about. But the most load-bearing thing I have ever built is patience. The willingness to sit at a conference table and say nothing while a man who does not know you smiles at a number he thinks belongs to him. The willingness to drive 400 miles in the dark and drink bad coffee and let the structure do what a structure does when it is built correctly. Hold. Dorothy knew that about me. She knew it better than I knew it about myself. She left me the trust, not because I was the smartest person she knew, not because I was the richest or the most connected. She left it to me because she knew I would wait. I would read the whole analysis. I would find the load-bearing point and I would not touch anything until I understood where the weight was sitting. And then I would build something that lasts. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels.